Recently, I had a subscriber complain about some pain on their sit bones, but only on one side. And he was asking me if I'd ever heard of this. So we're going to talk about this problem. So to answer that question, have I heard of pain on just one side of the sit bones? The answer is absolutely. This is actually a lot more common than people think. It doesn't make, intuitive sense right off the bat. We'd think, well, we have weight on our rear end on the saddle. Shouldn't there be discomfort on both sides? We're kind of weighting the saddle. The answer to that is sometimes. Many people do have more weight on one sit bone, however. And this stems from the fact that the hips on the seat, they are what I like to call, they're our blow-off valve for the whole bike fit, essentially. So it is the one contact point that has the most freedom of movement with the part of the bike that it contacts. So, for instance, our hands on the handlebars, they're relatively fixed. Yes, we can change positions, but as we're pedaling, it's not as if we're moving our hands over the handlebars in a dynamic way. And our feet are the same way. Yes, we can point our toes or drop our heels, and we can take advantage of the float that's available in our cleats. But for the most part, we're relatively locked in at our feet, or at least restricted in some way. And so what does this cause? It basically then, those two contact points being a little bit more fixed, work up and down the chain so that the hips then are affected. They're kind of the area that everything converges on. And because our hips aren't truly attached to the saddle, it's more resting and moving over the saddle. The hips and the pelvis, that's the contact point that's going to compensate for anything else that's happening in the rest of the body. And yes, compensations happen in the legs and in the feet and in the hands and the elbows and the shoulders, but a lot of it gets transferred to the hips and the pelvis. So here's the big takeaway. In my experience, and I've been doing this for a long time, pretty much almost nobody sits perfectly square on their saddle. So pretty much everybody sits with one hip further forward or one hip off to one side, either the right or the left, or a little bit of both. And the pelvis isn't static on the saddle. It does move dynamically. And what is ideal? There's a fairly wide range, but in general, we want a moderate amount of lateral movement, left to right, through the pelvis, so that we're moving over the saddle slightly. But because so many people sit off center or skewed on their seat, that side to side motion often translates into diagonals. And that's where, to some degrees, we get some more significant problems. And this is where, when we have a skewed sitting pattern and a skewed dynamic movement over the saddle, and then we're trying to produce power through the lower body, this is where we end up putting more pressure and weighting one sit bone more than the other, and we get one-sided sit bone pain. So where does the skewed sitting come from? That could take hours to kind of go through everything, but it comes from all over the place, and it can come from anywhere. It really comes down to a lot of the left to right imbalances we have in our body, or top to bottom, or front to back. So the most common ones, left to right, like we're right hand dominant or right leg dominant, and that's going to create maybe one leg that's more coordinated than the other, and so it's going to be, quote unquote, in the game a little bit more in the pedal stroke. The front to back balance, that might have to do with like balance between anterior trunk muscles and posterior trunk muscles, or kind of more concretely for cycling, perhaps somebody is pedaling more quad dominant and not using their glutes or their hip extensors as much. That's going to certainly affect how they're sitting on their saddle. And things as simple as a small scoliosis in the spine or a twist in the spine often produces these imbalances. I've even had clients where one wrist has a little bit less extension because of an old wrist fracture, and so they have to position that wrist on the handlebar slightly different, which changes the elbow position, which changes the shoulder position, which created a twist through the spine, which then translated to the pelvis. So it's this very diverse and expansive sort of network of issues that can crop up, and it really can come from almost anywhere. Now, this can seem sort of disconcerting or discouraging in some cases, because it's like, oh man, since we all have these imbalances, then we're all screwed. There's nothing we can do. There's good news. The good news is that we don't have to fix these imbalances 100% of the way in order to make a pretty significant impact on our fit. In fact, in my experience of doing this and treating people as a PT, in most cases, if we can make up a small percentage of this imbalance, if we can just try and manage some of the progression of it, or just make a small advance in it, it can have tremendous impacts on how we fit the bike. And so if let's say you have really tight hamstrings, that's a really basic one, and it's affecting your ability to be in an aggressive position on the bike, or your saddle height or something like that. You don't need to get to the point where you can, do a standing forward bend and put your palms flat on the ground in order to make your position slightly more aggressive without causing trouble. I've even had people where they just make incremental improvements in their hamstring mobility in this situation, and produce pretty drastic results on the bike, so they're allowed a much more aggressive position now. So the best thing you could do is to, one way or the other, whether it's just through doing exercises on your own or seeking out some professional help to kind of discern some of your weaknesses and imbalances, but if you can figure some of those out and pick out the biggest ones and just try and chip away at them, you just do a little bit each day, and you'll notice a pretty big change in your ability to ride comfortably, ride powerfully for longer periods. And quite frankly, this is something that anyone, no matter how fit you are, can benefit from. Even if your goal is not to, get a more aggressive position, it's this working on these imbalances, and again, not spending hours on it, but just a few minutes a day can go a long way towards just making you a better rider, helping you to ride, again, more comfortably, more powerfully even. So in the comments below, let me know what kind of imbalances, what kind of problems have you struggled with on the bike? Any exercises that you found that really have helped you out? If you're interested in an exercise program, I do have one available on my website that is pretty comprehensive and is geared specifically towards cyclists, and I'll put a link in the description below for that. Thank you again if you have been sharing, or if you will share this video with someone you think might benefit from it. The links to social media, Facebook and Twitter are below, and check out some of my other videos here. And again, if you haven't, please subscribe. Thanks, guys.